are you?
Good, good. We can't learn, right?
Yeah. Feel free, yeah.
My son is a big fan of Navy.
What's that?
My son is a big fan of Navy.
Oh, really? That's great, yeah.
We will sit in the front.
Yeah, of course, please do.
Sure, I know how it is.
Yeah, he'll be talking a lot about the Navy and
Sure,
all the
what's your
oceans
name?
and stuff, so.
Where are you from?
I'm from Colombia.
Wonderful. Muy bien.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, that's great. Hi.
Great. So we have a really special event for you guys. I don't know if you guys have been following the news, but there seem to kind of be UFOs out there, and this is kind of news to a lot of people, but maybe to those of you following, it's not news at all. But so Tim is one of the most important figures in the modern UFO movement, or public-facing figures. He testified in front of Congress in November 2024. So he was part of the second open UFO hearing in almost 50 years. So Congress has not been looking at this topic until recently. There was the 2017 New York Times article that kickstarted the whole program, especially in the modern media movement. And so yeah, Tim has been, he was also in the Navy. He was an admiral in the Navy, a rear admiral. And he was like the nation's top oceanographer. He worked for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So Navy guy, ask him any sort of questions about, there's a lot of stuff going on with NOAA these days. So, Tim's sort of all over the place. He has, he's the NOAA director. He is also the rear admiral in the Navy, and he's been doing a lot of work as far as marine science, and we're really happy to be joined by him.
Thanks. Sri. Appreciate that. Good. Okay, y'all can hear me okay? Good. Great. Nice to be with you all, and really respect Yale University and this community, as I was very close to accepting admission here when I was a long time ago in 1985 when I was applying to undergraduate schools. I decided to go to the Naval Academy because I wanted to study ocean science, and they had a really good oceanography program. But this school was on my list, and I came here for a recruiting trip. I was a swimmer, so appreciate you all, and I wish you all the best in your whoever are faculty, staff, or students. So this whole topic of UFOs, I include UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, the new term for it, as well as USOs, unidentified submerged objects, the undersea variant of the phenomena in this. And what I wanted to do here is just give you kind of like three different sort of things to talk about. One is an introduction into my involvement. The second thing is a kind of a higher level where I am advocating U.S. policy to be. As Sri mentioned, I testified in front of Congress. I have access and contacts in the White House. And so I am advocating for some positions on UAP policy. And as well, I also have access to some Trump appointees in the Department of Defense. And then the third thing is I'm going to dive into a little bit, literally, the undersea aspect of the phenomena, because that's my specialty. I was 36 years in the federal government as an oceanographer, and I know this area well, and I thought it might interest you to know what's going on undersea. It's not talked about much. So those are the three kind of areas, and let's just go into it. And by the way, if you haven't seen what this image is from a Navy F-18 aircraft in 2015 that observed with forward-looking infrared sensor a very odd UAP. The video was declassified and released, and they call it the gimbal. Who here has seen this video? Good. Okay, so you guys know what we're talking about. I have to assume ignorance, but now I don't have to, so thank you very much. So first off, I'd like to get in front there that I just don't do UAP. It's not even a day job for me. My most important job is being a father and husband. This is my family. I have three awesome daughters. My oldest is here joining me, Laurel, and That's us with my middle daughter, who's a midshipman at the Naval Academy, her boyfriend Nathan in there. And my wife was a Navy diver, by the way. She's right there next to me, a Navy salvage and diving officer who I respect beyond measure. And then my youngest daughter, Cedar, she's still a high school student. But that's us. We live in Annapolis, Maryland, and my wife's a giant champion for this issue, by the way. And we work together on it. I probably never would have gone into it if she didn't encourage me, because this is the stigma. This is highly career risking, but she encouraged me, and I went with it. So we'll see what happens. But also, just quickly, my experience in the Navy, I served on an aircraft carrier in the Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns, the USS Kitty Hawk. That's relevant to this topic because of all the aircraft carrier sightings, which I'll talk about. But that was a formative experience for me. 2 combat deployments. We flew the first strikes into Afghanistan after 9/11 against the Taliban, and then into Iraq too. But also I have experience with submarines. I'm an oceanographer, and submarines are the biggest users of oceanographer next to SEALs, who I also work with. And so I have that experience, and this was in the Arctic. Where's my Alaska friend? What's your name again? Yeah, so there you go. There's my picture for you. Wow. Okay. 40 degrees below, by the way. That's why I'm wearing all that stuff. And then, of course, what's relevant here is I had a lot of time in the Pentagon. And so that, knowing how the government works, how the DoD works, how the intelligence community works, or the IC, I know it. I did that for a lot of my career, and it's relevant to this topic. But also, I worked, as Shri mentioned, at the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, America's top ocean, weather, climate, environmental science agency. And come on down, please, sit up front. And it's also relevant here because we're talking about science. And I won't go into this, but it's in the news a lot now with the federal government cutting a lot of jobs. And in my former agency, NOAA, and that's a thing. But ultimately, I was really excited to work for this agency because it was everything I did in the Navy, oceanography, weather, environmental science, but for the nation. Come on down, good to have you. And so NOAA, if no one really knows about them very much, they are a 20,000 member agency. About 7,000 of those are contractors, and they do everything from flying 18 environmental satellites, operating 16 oceanographic and fisheries survey ships, 9 aircraft, some of which fly through hurricanes to collect really vital data for hurricane warnings, as well as an army of 400 technical scientific scuba divers, and doing things like coral reef restoration, making nautical charts, and managing our nation's fisheries, which are a $321 billion economic impact endeavor. And so it's a really vital agency, as well as the weather forecast that the agency puts out. Everybody here gets a weather warning, likely, either on TV or by your phone, for something in the winter, whether it's a blizzard, in the summer, high heat, from this agency. So it's really an amazing group of people who affect every American life every day, and I really liked working for them. So getting into the topic at hand, now, I got interested in UAP, it sort of grew throughout my life. I used to watch, and I'm of that age, I don't know if anybody else here is, Leonard Nimoy narrated the show called In Search Of, and UFOs were talked about during that in certain episodes. And that intrigued me, and so it was there, lingering. But then I served as a captain in the Navy as the superintendent of the U.S. Naval Observatory. And this command has a very important mission. It's notably known as the place where the vice president lives, but that's kind of a holdover recent effect where the vice president took over the superintendent's house. I think it was Walter Mondale, and then that just continued. But that's that one half of the organization. The rest of it, they have a team of astronomers that make star catalogs. And they're important because star catalogs, positions, brightnesses, locations of stars, bright stars in the universe, close in our galaxy, are important for navigation of satellites. So if you pull out your phone, you're navigating off Waze or whatever, and your GPS is informing your location. So if GPS tells you where you are on the globe, how does GPS know where it is? Where's the constellation references itself off a thing called the celestial reference frame, which is basically a bunch of angles to bright objects in the universe, supernovas, stars, and this agency catalogs them. So it's a, when you think about it, spy satellites, GPS, this is a national mission that's very strategic in importance, and the observatory does that. So, but the team who did that for me were astronomers and astrophysicists who all know a lot about the universe, and I learned during my time there the universe is basically starts with our galaxy that has between 100 and 400 billion stars. I mean, we don't even know the real answer, and then we're in an observable universe of 2 trillion or more galaxies. Your mind my mind can't even get around how large that is. So to think now, and if we know that life is a property of the universe because we're here in it on this planet and there's life, and it's very diverse, by the way, it's rich in life. So if life is a property of the universe, why would this be the only place where life is? And intelligent life is a property of the universe. Why would us in this vast space be the only intelligent life? So I finished this tour with an open mind to that after learning so much about that. And then I became convinced in 2015. Now, some of you might have seen Ryan Graves when he came here. Who raise your hand if you saw Ryan speak? A few, yeah, good friend of mine, you'll see later. But ultimately, he was out there on a squadron on the USS Theodore Roosevelt in 2015, participating in an exercise, and the aviators were having multiple experiences with UAP, UFOs. And so, for example, that's the ship. I have a screenshot from this video that has since been released or declassified and released called the Go Fast. And so I was a one-star admiral, and all the meteorologists in the Navy worked for me. And so every aircraft carrier and helicopter carrier had a meteorologist on the ship who was under my supervision. And so that was my responsibility. I was the chief meteorologist of the Navy. And so safety of flight was big responsibility of mine. And what happened is these aviators were having near mid-air collisions. And I learned about it because my 2-star boss, the U.S. League Forces Command, overseeing this exercise, wrote an email to all the subordinate commanders, me being one, but also the head of the strike group, the admiral in charge of the strike group, and others. And the title of the email on the Navy Secret Network was, all caps, urgent safety of flight. And the text was very brief. It just said, if any of you know what these are, tell me ASAP. We're having numerous near mid-air collisions, and we're going to have to shut down the exercise if they don't stop. And attached to the video was the Go Fast, attached to the email was the Go Fast video, and this is several years before it was declassified. And I knew right then and there that was not us. We don't ever test advanced technology in training ranges. I served on aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers got to go through a training cycle like the one that was going on then. They got to get every pilot certified to land on the flight deck. It's super compressed, a lot of pressure. You can't mess up. You got to meet all these deadlines to deploy. And this is during all the things that were going on in Iraq and Syria. So the Navy doesn't mess around in training ranges. So I knew right then and there. And by the way, I had special access programs. Been read into them about adversary tech. And I knew there were no adversaries that had tech like this. And by the way, that Go Fast was operating in a fleet. There were several of them in formation that Ryan might share with you. And so I just knew that was not us. And I became convinced that this is off-world technology. And of course, that's all come out in the news, and we'll talk about that. But so now I had to sit on this for a while, but I didn't, because I was still in the government. This was all classified. But as, again, the chief meteorologist of the Navy, it didn't sit well with me because this was a major safety of flight issue. And I didn't even finish this. I received the email one day. The next day, it was wiped from my computer. And then I went to briefings with my boss at U.S. League Forces Command every week afterwards. And the topic of conversation during every one of these was the training cycle. That was our job. He was not a commander in charge of forward forces. Those go under combatant commands. So everything was about getting carriers ready to deploy or naval forces. And something like this should have been the top issue to talk about. And no one talked about it because it was classified under a special program. And that's why it was right for my computer. I since knew that because it touched on a classified program that the sender, the operations officer didn't know about. And so then the agency in charge of it, Defense Intelligence Agency, that's why they pulled all the emails back. So, but that didn't sit well with me because here you go, you got an overclassification issue impacting safety of flight, and that was a problem for me. So, but I sat on that, I did my job, I went on to NOAA after I left the Navy, but then, of course, fast forward, and you all probably know this if you're in this room, that there was the second hearing. The first hearing involved some government witnesses, but the second big hearing were actual UAP whistleblowers and witnesses. And I think everybody here knows about this. Does anybody here not know about this hearing? Then you can raise your hand, don't be shy. You don't know? Okay, so there was a hearing in 2023, and what you had is there was 3 witnesses. And by the way, you can see I'm in the very left there. I was in the front row. I was the guest of the witness on the left, Ryan Graves, who was a Navy pilot on the Theodore Roosevelt who saw and experienced UAP. The other witness in the middle was David Grush, who was an intelligence officer at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, an agency I know really well. I know the last 5 commanders of that agency. I work with them. They're my friends, vice admirals and senior executives. And then he testified the fact that the government's in possession of UAP crashed UAP materials, which I know to be a fact. I know the people who've seen them, and as well as information that it's withholding. And then the last on the right is Commander David Fravor, who is the commanding a F-18 squadron off the USS Nimitz in 2004. When that encountered a UAP, they called the Tic Tac UAP because it looked like a Tic Tac or a propane tank. And they all had firsthand witnesses of these extraordinary phenomena, and then they testified in front of Congress, put it on the record, and all this information had been hidden from Congress, which is the big problem here. Again, I'm okay with classifying sensitive technology, but hiding things from the American people and the Congress, that's not okay. That really goes against our separation of powers and our Constitution. So that was that, and then we had another one, by the way, in November this year. Raise your hand if you did not know about this. You did not? Okay, so there was one in November. You can see me on the very left there. I testified next to Lou Elizondo. He was very prominent in this feature because he was involved with the UAP office task force that was in a DOD that was investigating UAP. And he has a book out now called Imminent. Raise your hand if you've read the book. Those who have not, good to know, read the book. It's a great book. This gives you if you care about this topic, it is the A to Z on UAP. It's a really good book. And then there were some other witnesses I won't go into, but there you go. And this was really historic too. And so, by the way, Ryan, it's funny, reversal. So I'm in the front row with there on the left, and Ryan testified, and then I testified, and Ryan was right next to me on my left. So, anyways, but I wanted to back him up, and I'll explain to you why. But ultimately, this is making the news. This is getting out there. It was in the Wall Street Journal and everywhere else. This is, as Shri mentioned, this is getting mainstream, finally, which is impressive, and that's why I'm here. I don't get paid to go do this UAP stuff. I have a day job, but I think it's important. And you all represent, for the most part, the next generation, and I'll talk to that too. But so where I am at now is I'm working to support those who are seeking disclosure, controlled disclosure is the term, and ways to address this phenomena. Ryan has stood up an organization called Americans for Safe Aerospace. There's the logo. I like the logo. It's creative. It's kind of like the NASA logo, but without the N. And so, but relevant. And, yeah, pretty neat, huh? Clever. But he is. They're advocating to primarily get the FAA to institute a reporting system, because again, the stigma with this topic is so severe that pilots still suffer professionally if they talk about this, and that is the wrong place to be, especially in view of the safety of flight issues that Ryan experienced. And just what amazing sources of data that the aviation industry can be for this. Everybody here has gone, I think, probably taken a commercial flight. If we just start capturing data and reporting, we can learn so much more about this phenomena. It's just so much more. So I'm supporting Ryan. I'm on his advisory board. I'm also working with Avi Loeb of the Galileo project at Harvard. And this is a terrific effort because he's finally, and this is bold because again, mainstream science, like mainstream media, they're just too gun shy on this topic. And Avi said, you know what, this makes sense. Our universe is so old, our universe is so big, why would there not have been another technical civilization to have evolved and potentially have artifacts that come to us like the Voyager probe that's gone interstellar now, and another civilization can find if it ever gets there? Why wouldn't there be one here? And he's written some books on this topic, and I won't go into that, but he's setting up a system of observatories, he's got 3 already, to start just collecting on the sky, using AI to process and capture the data, and we'll see where we go. I'll be speaking with Avi next week on the Hill. We're going to be at an event with the House Oversight Committee, and for any of you who were planning to attend this event that was scheduled for tomorrow, and you had to reschedule, thank you, because that's the reason I had to change it. I'm going to be on the Hill, and I'm actually going to be in a part of a secret briefing on the Hill the day before. So this is a topic that Congress cares a lot about. Avi's wonderful. I'm working with him. And then there are others. I mean, there are other very credible scientists. So having been the superintendent of the observatory, I like to follow astronomy. And I've met this really wonderful astronomer named Dr. Beatrice Villarreal. And she is from Sweden. And she's done this very interesting study where she's looked at old photographic plates of stars from observatories. And this is the way they did it in the age. In fact, the Naval Observatory where I commanded, that we had troves of photographic plates that we had to go digitize when I was there. But that's how we stored the data. And so ultimately she went to these original sources, and then she looked at modern data, like you see the 2 here, and she found that in the modern data some stars were missing. What's up with that? And I mean, and this, interestingly, this 1952 sighting or data coincided with the big UAP sighting over Washington, D.C. the same month and year. So she's using this as data to potentially not prove, but augment our knowledge of potential UAP. Very clever way to look into this. And this is, again, mainstream astronomy wouldn't touch this. So she's showing a lot of courage coming out and looking at this clever, novel way to explore UAP, and I applaud that. So, and Beatrice is a member of the advisory board with me on this new think tank called the Soul Foundation. And this is a UAP think tank, and we seek to be the foremost authority on UAP studies. And this was founded by a very prominent researcher named Gary Nolan. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Nobel Prize candidate, biomedicine, Stanford University. So Stanford University is basically sanctioned a UAP think tank. Think about that. And then Peter Skafish is his co-founder, who is a sociocultural anthropologist. And then you have Jonathan Berta, who is a private sector tech founder and entrepreneur in Europe. And so the idea, those are the 3 founders on the top, combining these 3 areas of hard medicine, hard science, soft sciences, as well as tech and the private sector, to bring all together to look into UAP. And so others who are on the advisory board are on the lower level there. Eo Whiteley is a space psychologist. She helps advise on human factors for cockpits for the ESA and for the U.S. aviation industry. Jacques Vallée is really the Einstein of UAP. He's been doing this for decades long. He started researching UAP before I was born, and he's fantastic. He has books out on the topic, and so he's on the advisory board. And there's Diana Pasulka, who is just wonderful in her novel way of thinking, a religious studies professor, tenure track at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and she has 2 books out called Encounters and American Cosmic. I highly recommend you go read those books. Anybody here read either of those? Oh, you have? Oh, very good. Which one? Both? It's a good book. Yeah. I know. Okay, so there you go. Awesome. I love that. And these are friends of mine. We work together and collaborate daily as part of this. And our big push is to help influence U.S. policy for controlled disclosure. And so this comes to the second part of my presentation. Now, who here owns a dog? I love dogs. Good. I have 5. Yeah, there you go. Have you ever? Who's heard of the term a dog's breakfast? Nobody. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is a British term, and I love it because the Brits influenced a lot of the U.S. Navy. I was in the U.S. Navy. I love British terms and traditions. And the dog's breakfast is a British term that means basically a mix of everything that's in a non-coherent, sort of just messed up way. So when you say something's messy, they like to say it's a dog's breakfast. And right now, US UAP policy is basically a dog's breakfast. And I'll explain that. So first off, there are different agencies doing different things on UAP. And some of it is overseen at the high level, and some of it's sort of grassroots. OD&I was directed by Congress, the logo on the upper left, to issue a report on UAP, and they did. The DoD I'll talk about later. Give me a second on that. The DOE has a lot of activity on UAP that's not being released. I have a friend who worked with the National Nuclear Security Administration, and he was on a DOE national lab, I think it was Sandia, and some of his friends had knowledge that they were walking by a building called the Exotic Materials Lab. And when he asked them what that meant, they said, oh, you're not right into that program? Okay, we can't tell you. But I know with certainty from other sources that's UAP crash retrieval analysis. And that's at DOE labs. Then you have the FBI on the lower left there. And there's a really interesting movement going on. A field office in Ohio has taken it upon themselves to start investigating and interviewing UAP witnesses. No one's told them to do it. They just thought it was the right thing to do because they know it's coming out. Once Congress started getting involved, they said, all right, this is our job. We're the FBI. We have to start documenting this. And so it's a couple brave agents that I've been supporting and working with, and their job is just to document. So every time I get a UAP witness that comes to me, and this happens quite a bit, I send them their way. They put it on the record because they know how valuable it's going to be in the future because this is going to happen. This is breaking out. It is going to happen. So they're doing good work, and they're supported by their agent in charge, and that's kind of interesting. And their headquarters knows, and they're not quashing it, which is great. NASA put together a UAP study team. They didn't do anything, though. They issued a glossy report that said UAP are important, but there was no data. And I know for a fact NASA is sitting on a trove of data, imagery, video, but that, again, is the government policy now to not release it. And I'll get to that. Interestingly, NSF, the National Science Foundation, again, a grassroots sort of thing under a certain study program for astronomy, decided to have a workshop on UAP communication and education, which I thought was really relevant, certainly here as an undergraduate institution and graduate school, that should be. We should get the next generation involved. So again, this was sort of something that was not overseen and supported at a top level. It was someone who took initiative and risk, and her name is Dr. Gretchen Stallman, a communications major, PhD. And so you have a mix of things happening. It's not really coherent, but it's happening. Now let me get to the DoD. So DoD's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office has been named by Congress, designated to be the UAP Collection Data Reporting Authority. And it's interesting. Now, let me get a measure of where people are at on this. Who's heard of the ARROW? Okay, good. About half of you guys. So this is the designated office. It's an interesting thing going on here because Congress is, and I know how this works. Okay, I was the head of an agency. We had to issue reports to Congress too. In law, Congress said do this. We did it. But it was always a kind of mixed bag because if a given administration, depending on who the president is, if we thought what Congress told us to do was good, we'd do it if it was aligned with administration priorities. If we didn't like it, we would give them the minimal effort. And that's what's happening here, is ARROW is basically following the congressional intent, but the policy in the government is still not to release much. Let me illustrate this. And it's not only that, it's not only not releasing everything, it's also covering up and putting out disinformation. So bear with me. Here's a little story. So Sean Kirkpatrick was the intelligence specialist who was the first director of this ARROW office. And longtime career professional, I respect his experience. And sounds like some of you guys know who he is. Raise your hand if you know Sean. Okay, know of him? Gotcha. So after he left Aero, I went and testified on the Hill, as I showed you, on 2024. And this was his release statement about me and my testimony. Okay? This is absolutely stunning. So he took the time and effort to release a statement. He's a contractor now with the National Lab. So, okay, he's on the government's dime as a contractor, and he took the time to say this officially, not just off the cuff, but here's my official statement. And let me kind of parse this for you. So he said I went and visited Aero. I did. I wasn't seeking a job. I was invited by their Navy lead, who was a friend of mine from my Pentagon days. And he said, come on over, we'll give you a tour. So I came over, I sat down, I met with the director, and then I got interviewed by two of their senior personnel. And what I thought would be a hour-long meeting on a Friday afternoon, 3-day weekend, turned out to be a 3-hour-long information influence operation on me. Because I'm a senior official, I'm out there, and they were working hard to tell me, to justify what they were saying and doing, etc. And it was at an unclassified level, so there's a reason for that. But ultimately, then he says this stuff. So, I am predisposed to conspiracy theories, etc. And ultimately, he says, I verified my decision with some of his previous bosses and peers. Well, let me tell you this. In the last 10 years of my time in government, here are who my bosses have been. 2 2-stars admirals, 4 4-star admirals, and a cabinet secretary, the Secretary of Commerce. I can guarantee you, Sean did not reach out to any of them. And if they had, they would have told me. So this is an outright lie. And I mean an outright lie, which I can absolutely verify. So why is that? And it's actually clear. This is what they call counterintelligence. It's Disinformation 101. And he's getting paid off to do this by the USDI. So the government policy is not only to cover up and keep classified UAP, it is to actually discredit people like me, which I find quite offensive. I mean, I'm doing this again on my own volition. And I'm not nobody, okay? I served some time in the government in public service, and here he does this. So that's telling, and it's important to know because your taxpayer dollars are funding that activity, and I don't think that's right. I hope you don't either. So, and actually, let me build on this one more time. It's important. So, when I was in this meeting at Aero, some of the things they were saying is, oh, okay, now I'm going to get to this incident about the USS Nimitz that Commander Fravor, some of you might not know well about it, but in 2004, Commander Fravor was flying off the USS Nimitz and encountered this UAP I talked about called the Tic Tac. And one of the things that not only was the Aero folks trying to discredit some of the whistleblowers like David Grush and Chris Mellon, they were also trying to tell me that some of the reports maybe were false. And one of the things they said to me is they were trying to say, the Tic Tac was U.S. tech. It could have been, and then when the Tic Tac was observed near the water, and it was roiling under the surface, that might have been a U.S. Navy submarine. And if you talk to Dave Fravor and Alex, the people who went, the pilots, they've seen submarines. This was not a submarine. So this is part of the disinformation. Oh, that was U.S. tech. You know, and it's insane the fabrication that's going on here. But it's not new. So first off, on the right there, Chris Mellon wrote that article with that title. I encourage you to look it up because he goes and parses out one of Aero's reports and all the falsehood in it. I mean, just constant falsehood. And that's important. That was a government project, again, paid for by taxpayer dollars, and it was so flawed. And why we have this office so they're not putting out good work. But it's part of a pattern. And if you're really interested in this topic, look at that book by Greg Bishop. It's about the Air Force's disinformation campaign against a private citizen, and absolutely unethical and behavior there, and likely illegal. And the book is a really good story, by the way. It's a great read. And if you really want to understand what's going on, that is a great read, and it tells you what's happening today. And I have a problem with that, so I hope you do too. Now, going into, now that was the executive branch, here's the Congress. Congress is kind of mixed up too. On the left, a lot of supporters. You have the UAP Disclosure Act put forward by Senator Schumer and Rounds that puts out a process for disclosing information in a deliberate way, not a way that's going to be so disruptive, but more methodical, with House Oversight Committee supporters too that I said I'm going to meet, that you see there. And this article here by Micah Hanks talks about this in detail, but then there's those who opposed it and have prevented it from being passed, this UAP Disclosure Act, and that's been Senator Rounds and even the Speaker, et cetera. But ultimately, so there's a mixed bag there, and then ultimately where I am recommending and advocating for is, like any good effort, the U.S. government needs to get together. Agencies need to work collaboratively in a coherent manner and have a way ahead for UAP. And why is that? Why is a whole of government approach important? And it is because doing so will advance our interests. That's why you create national policy in the first place. And I did this. I did this on ocean things at NOAA, and I'll give you an example of that. So, but just first getting ahead of that, and this is sort of civics 101. I hope I'm not boring you, but it's important because when you advocate for disclosure, this is the things that got to go. First off, now here I am in the White House, my only Oval Office meeting. There's a whole story behind that, and I have a book coming out this summer about my leadership of NOAA under Trump. There's a reason I'm not back there now. I'll just say that. And but ultimately, to implement policy, there's a couple things you got to have. First, you got to have the White House to say go, and it's usually through a presidential memorandum or executive order. Then that document needs to put in place things. One is a national council or body of agency representatives, the whole of government. And for UAP, it would be NASA, NOAA, the DoD, probably DHS, DOE for sure, and have them work together, and then put together a national strategy, a high level. This is what we're going to do. Here are our priorities and goals, and then a plan to implement the strategy. It's kind of straightforward stuff, but this is how it works. And then ultimately, when the White House does all that, you really want Congress to back you up and institutionalize it in legislation. Those are the things that we want. The legislation is obviously the UAP Disclosure Act. What we've not had is all this White House action, and that's what I've been advocating for. And so so that policy, basically, like I said, the legislation should be the controlled disclosure in the UAP Disclosure Act. And again, for those who are not familiar with that, look it up. It's a very detailed bill, and it's very interesting because it was informed by people in the know that went to the Hill and briefed Congress and their staff. And it includes terms like UAP, non-human intelligence, technology of unknown origin. How fascinating is that? Throughout the bill. You don't get a piece of legislation unless there's a lot of credible conversations occurring by people with authoritative knowledge, and that's what's happened. And I know all these people. And the whole government approach that I talk about is really what we did after 9/11. I know not all of you were around then, I think, but some of you were. Ultimately, what happened is there was no information sharing within intelligence agencies, and that led to that missing the cue of those terrorists. And changes afterwards have since remedied that. And so we're calling for something similar with regards to UAP. And by the way, an individual I'll introduce later, Jay Stratton, who has a book come out, and he was in charge of the UAP task force. He likens this UAP issue to 9/11 on steroids, because not all of it is friendly. And that's what Lou Elizondo also talks to. And so there's some real concern. And I didn't really accept that until really recently. So there's something there. But ultimately, and that's Jay. He led the UAP task force. And in fact, that little symbol there with the star, he got an award for that, a national award for leading the UAP task force. So it was recognized as something legitimate. So Jay did. And then the Sol Foundation, which I'm an advisor for, that's what they're really seeking to do, is advise U.S. policy, bring in, again, remember the private sector, academia, and it's really remarkable how many tenure-track professors are getting into this game. I was just at a conference at Rice University where I presented what I'm going to speak about in the next section, and that's led by their whole religious studies department. it's a big movement now, and just the fact that Yale University's UFO Society is that's why I'm here. So great that you're a part of this. Okay. Well, let's see. And just sort of to bring this home, this government approach here, I did this at NOAA. We launched an effort on ocean mapping and exploration. The oceans are really unknown. We've not even mapped 25% of the seabed. That's how much of the seafloor we don't know about. We don't even know 90% of the ocean volume. We've not explored. The ocean is so unknown. We know more about the surface of the moon and Mars than we do the ocean. And it's important because it's important to manage natural resources like fisheries, safety of navigation. We had 2 Navy submarines crash into unknown seamounts in the last decade and cause billions of dollars of damage and kill sailors. There's so many reasons to map and know the ocean, and we just haven't yet. So we put forward an issue, and we got it approved. We got the president to sign a memorandum. It directed the establishment of an interagency council. We developed a national strategy, and actually this was all something I initiated. I'm going to say it. I went and briefed the White House Ocean Policy Committee to do this, and they said, let's do it. And then, and actually we got the Ocean Exploration Act ahead of the strategic plan. So we had Congress buying into it too. So there's a playbook, and we can do this. And that's what I'm spending time on doing. And that's why I'll be on the Hill this week. But let me go into now, let me finish though and say, okay, we did all that, but the big why has to be answered. And why is because it's doing good. It's doing good for our country. Ocean mapping and exploration supports our DOD, our Navy. Our Navy needs to be able to navigate safely. It supports the economy, every seaport and marine transportation. And 90% of trade goes by ship. So that helps knowing the ocean, knowing the seabed, it helps that. Then, of course, it makes for safer recreational activities out on our coastline. So that's what was our purpose. That's why we did it. That's why the White House approved it. That's why Congress passed laws about it. So UAP applies. Okay, I'm going to shift gears, and we're getting the last section of this topic. I hope you're still with me. It's all good. Okay, thank you. Oh shoot, let me just wrap this up. I have 2 more things to say. First off, I'm here because I see a sea change occurring, and this is really neat. This is all the Harvard Galileo project members. You'll see a lot of them are young, some of them are old, but ultimately it's the younger folks I'm interested in because I found in my studies, especially with respect to changing culture, usually takes a professional generation of about 25 years. I saw it in aviation safety. In the 50s, it was hard for aviators to report problems in the cockpit. Macho aviators, the right stuff, and so after a lot of planes fell out of the sky and killed people, it became more acceptable to report problems in the cockpit with design, etc., safety issues. And now it's just a standard. Aviation safety is sacrosanct. People report any problem. No one's career is on the line. No one's going to be judged, and that's the thing. And that took a professional generation of 25 years. This is what's occurring now with UAP. There's still stigma. There's still overclassification, but people like you are here because you're over that, and you know this is novel and interesting and real. And so that's why I came up here to give this talk, is to encourage you to keep sharing this with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and get them interested, because there's so much to gain from it. And what I mean by that is this. So there's a lot of really interesting science and engineering that could occur by understanding the craft, the entities and their intent. It could be scary, Bobby, you left the room, I'm sorry, but ultimately there's also a lot of knowledge that we don't have and we want to have that could benefit society and change things like food security and biomedicine and transportation and energy. So there is a lot there. And so I think I kind of wrap it all up by saying, when has ignorance ever been a good national strategy? So let's go forward and be bold and accept the fact that it could be scary, but know we'll still learn, and learning is important. It's a lifelong journey. Okay, that's my pitch. Now I want to dive into the things that I'm really interested in, and that is underwater stuff, underwater UFOs. Because I know a lot about the ocean. My whole career has been dedicated to it. And so this is sort of the interesting things that most of you probably don't know about. I published the very first Sol white paper. I talked about the issue in a scholarly way, and if you care to read however 25, 30 pages of it, check it out online. But I want to go into some examples here that are probably more interesting. And so, first off, there's not a lot of literature on this topic. Here really are all that exists. These books here, you can look them up, and so some people have taken that step to go into. And by the way, for you guys, I'd be happy to share the PDF of this presentation with you if you want that. I'm so glad to do it. And so these are really interesting books here. I've read them all, and I won't say everyone is rock solid in terms of their research and standards, but they're there. There are a lot of eyewitness accounts, and it's a point on the line of what this whole topic is. But I think really the seminal work that exists is this recent book by Richard, who's a friend of mine, and he let me review it, by the way, before it was published. He's got 3 volumes coming out. The first one's published, and it's really comprehensive and thorough. And it's really worth a read. Again, not what he does, and I love his approach. He basically takes all this eyewitness testimony from various sources, and he cites the source. He actually assesses the validity, and so some that are suspect, he'll say suspect, and but then. And so there you go. He just gives you what he knows. It's out there. He doesn't like take a side, doesn't throw out propagate a speculation. He just puts it out there. What's known, and so it's really solid and fascinating. And so what I'm going to give to you today, and the rest of this is some of the highlights from the book and some of what I've heard personally. And so going back this century, he started out with one really interesting report that was published in the Singapore Times about a freighter that encountered a giant light source underneath the ship that then moved forward in front of the ship. And this is a ship captain who has no reason to report it. This is before the age of UFOs, right? This is well before the 1940s and 50s. And why would he even report that to a shipping captain of such an observation? But it was in the deck log, and he made the report to the periodical. So that was something. And then when you look at what happens later, you can see there's a sort of a trend. Going back to right after World War II, several eyewitness sailors on this ship near Alaska saw a disk emerge from the water and then dart off at high acceleration. Multiple eyewitnesses in the deck log of the ship. So there's that. Then you had an interesting occurrence in the Persian Gulf, which now, and I want to share with you, an important part of my approach in this is to take in what I hear and observe and then assess it for credibility. We can't just be like blindly following reporting because we're believers, right? We have to be objective about the data. And so this is a report that Richard documented in his book, and it was from another source. It was from 2 sources, actually. One of the books I showed you earlier, as well as the Naval Institute published an account of it in 1949 by a Navy officer on his ship. And he observed these spiraling lines of light in the pattern you see here in this region of the Arabian Gulf. And he wasn't sure what the source of it. Crazily, I saw the exact same thing when I was transiting the Straits of Hormuz into the Arabian Gulf in 1995. And it was actually bizarre. In fact, I was in my stateroom. I had finished my watches on the deck, on the bridge, and then my captain called me up. Get to the bridge, Tim. Okay, I come up, and I see these 100 yards wide spiraling lights, just like you'd see depicted here. It was the wildest thing in the world. And there were several of them, these basically these circles of spirals. And they were just rotating like this. And it was probably one of the most magnificent natural displays I've ever seen. But the explanation was fairly simple. It was bioluminescence, plankton that light up just like fireflies. And what was happening in the Strait of Hormuz, you have incoming and outgoing currents. And what happens in between the 2 currents, you get these vortices that are generated. And the circular rotation of the vortices, on the surface, it'll excite the plankton in a way that matches the rotation. And you could actually tell when you look at the water, you could tell it was a bunch of plankton, but ultimately, and so Richard grabbed that as a potential USO, unidentified submerged object, and it was at the time, but I know this to have a natural source. So anyways, some things can be explained, most things can't. And this is an example here. I have a Diana Pasulka, whose book you read. What's your name? Sydney. Yeah. So her dad was in the Coast Guard, and he was a sonarman. That's him. And you can see it says sonarman on the side, an old black and white photo of him. And they observed an object underwater on the sonar that was very large and moved out of the area, and they knew it because they had the bottom, and then all of a sudden there was an object at shallow depth, very large, as they transited over nearly half a mile, and then it was gone. And they came back, and the object wasn't there. What is that? That's basically an unidentified submerged object. But it affected him. It was so unusual. He had thousands of hours on the sonar, and then there was that. And I know the sonars they're using, though, because I have a PhD in underwater acoustics, you can get returns from fish schools, plankton on the mixed layer, but not the high source target levels the acoustic backscatter level that they saw. So this is clearly something that was hard and large. Well, there was that. Then the USS Maury had an identical observation. Sonar hit at a shallow depth over a long distance, and then they went back and it wasn't there. And they know their systems. They know when it's biologics. Whales don't backscatter like that, or animals or plankton. So there was something there. And Richard reported that in his book. I thought that was interesting because when I owned the oceanographic ships in the Navy, I had the second USS Maury that was under me. And it was the same type of ship, a hydrographic ship. This was really interesting in Richard's book. This aircraft carrier, nuclear powered, or nuclear jets, pardon me, they observed a giant disc, cigar-shaped craft in the region, and it was observing them, trailing them. And you have all these witnesses on the ship, sailors. Aircraft carriers are big. I was on one. There's 3,000 sailors. Then when you have the air wing, it's 5,000 people, and multiple witnesses. And then before it left, 2 discs popped out of the water. Everybody saw them, and then they all exited the area rapidly together. So there's a sighting, very credible, and many, many witnesses. And then there's this. Later, in off Nova Scotia, and if you guys are interested in this topic, this is the book. It's a book by an author named Chris Stiles. And he goes into kind of a CSI investigation to interview divers from the Canadian Navy that were involved with an effort after a mine warfare exercise called Sweep Clear 5 with Canadian ships that observed a UFO come into the water, too. And then when the ships went and investigated it and sent down divers, they observed 2 disc-shaped crafts and entities outside of them repairing them. Divers they didn't testify. They were interviewed and claimed this. They even said they took video. And so this is, again, this is just a witness account. I don't have data. I'm not saying it really happened, but kind of unlikely to be fabricated. Possibly, maybe, I don't know. It's a story that actually Richard didn't report on, but I've heard about. So interesting read. Then this is really interesting. Australian researcher named Jeff Cruikshank, he looked into this and gathered all this data. So in 1962, there was a nuclear airburst test trying to assess the impact of ICBM or nuclear detonation on our ICBMs. And so they launched this ICBM up into the atmosphere at 42 kilometers, detonated a nuclear warhead, and then on the lower right, you see 2 aircraft that were aloft observing it with their cameras. This is the image on the upper right of one of those cameras watching the airburst. The big circular thing is the airburst. And that triangle little thing there, that is a censored part of the airburst. And the original video shows basically an object fall from the sky. And I have, with 100% certainty from a senior government official former government official, advisor to several presidents named Harold Malmgren, you can look him up, he knows about this test. That was a UFO that crashed out of the sky because the EMP from the burst interfered with its, somehow caused it to crash. And we have no idea. Well, actually, we may. I don't know, though. And so what happened is this ship went and recovered it. The airburst was over some Pacific islands at a safeguard. And in the deck log, you can read about there, I highlighted it, that they recovered this pod. They called it a pod. And when they recovered the pod, if you look in the log over on the right, they lost power, which is one of these common things that happens in UAP interactions. Cars lose power. Something's going on there electromagnetically. So that's very interesting. And I know with certainty from authoritative sources like Harold, this was a UAP. We recovered it. I don't know where it is, but again, this is not uncommon. Then you have people who are starting to come to me. I had an officer of the Navy who came to me, served on this ship. He was in the North Atlantic, and in 1984, during a very severe storm in the North Atlantic, they detected an object on sonar that started closing rapidly on them. They found it unusual because the sea state was really high, and when the sea state's high, there's a lot of ambient noise, and normally you can't detect anything, and anything can't detect you. Again, this is my PhD area of study. So they were really surprised by this, and then when it started rapidly closing on them, they were actually frightened because this had every signature of a Russian torpedo, which they trained on. This is the Cold War, nuclear submarine officers. This is a ballistic missile sub. This is something they were ready for. And that had every aspect of a Russian torpedo closing on them. So what did they do? They dove to crush depth, near crush depth. So there's a depth that you can't go deeper, and they know what it is. Trust me, they try not to go near it. And this was an older boat, by the way, the von Steuben. But they were terrified. They were absolutely thinking this was their last day on Earth. And so they got really close to crush depth, and they basically said, okay, we're going to hold. And the object came near them, stopped, and then went aft on their stern and followed them for a few minutes, and then rapidly departed the area. As far as I know, the Soviets, had no technology that could do that then. Today, maybe. That's actually classified, but that was pretty much another unidentified submerged object. And because I've been speaking out, this officer, very objective guy, engineer, he called me up. He said, hey, I saw something I cannot explain. And it was that long ago. He did this to me. He did this a year ago. So think how many years since that occurred. And he's thought about it every day of his life. So it's something. Then after my last hearing, I had another guy call me up. He was a Navy captain, flew in P-3s. That's the aircraft you see on the upper right. This is an aircraft that does anti-submarine warfare. It basically drops down these things called sonobuoys that listen for submarines, and when they get a hit, they transmit it via radio signal to the aircraft. And so he did that for a career. He's an expert in this topic and field. And then he went afterwards, and he retired and worked as a civilian on that ship you see there, which is an acoustic surveillance ship. This kind of ship is how we find subs, both in Russian and Chinese. And the way they operate is they use two means. They use low-frequency active sonar, active. So they send out a big ping at low frequency that's very loud and has a wide range, and they wait for a return echo. And if anything is big and metal and hard down there in the ocean, they're going to hear it. They're going to know it's there. It's the whole purpose and design of these things. And we care about this a lot. So ultimately, they, at two different occasions off Japan, got really strong hits just at the same level as any enemy submarine would be. And so, of course, then the mode is to go and say, all right, now we're going to identify the sub. And then turn on the passive sonar. And the passive sonar will listen for things like the propeller's rotation or certain engineering components in the plant or even the flow noise around the hull of the submarine. All of those emit a very specific frequency signature. And we have classified tables of every adversary submarine and their specific signatures. They're like fingerprints. And so that's how we go and find adversaries and stay up on them. And for both these occasions, 0 passive hits. Nothing. No. And this is a giant anomaly. I mean, this is like having a high-resolution satellite looking at something and in terms of the underwater equivalent. And again, this officer found that so anomalous. After 35 years, he called me up after my hearing and said, I got to tell you something. So these are real things. Then, if you've read Lou's book, he talks about a instance where full motion video, I believe it was a Reaper, where he observed a very large object the size of an oil derrick traveling fast underwater. Now, Lou's not a bullshitter, okay? I know him personally. He's come out and taken great risks. So the things he says are real. He's not embellishing. And actually, I know this video from someone else too. He was an NRO, National Reconnaissance Office employee, and he's still with the government actually. So I have verified this from another source. That's crazy. I haven't seen the video, but I want to. But that's there. And so, and then Lou also talked about the fact, in his book, that the Navy was doing a missile recovery. I actually think Lou was wrong. I think it was really a torpedo recovery, because we don't normally do that. This is a picture of a torpedo recovery, where we send a kind of a blank round off to test how good the torpedo works, and then at a certain time it'll pop up from depth and they recover the asset because they're expensive. And so ultimately, but something similar, where a rescue swimmer was sent down to hook up to the retrieve asset, and then they observed a giant black mass surfacing, coming near the surface, and it so freaked out the crew that they let go of the torpedo and they launched up. But this is something they came forward and talked about because they were so traumatized by it. It was just so unlike anything they'd ever seen. So there's another USO that I can't explain, but I want to learn more about. A few other topics, the Nimitz Tic Tac. I mentioned that there was a roiling surface underneath the object. Who knows what that was? So when I go to the Hill today, was it a USO? Was that thing being launched by a mothership USO? I don't know. But I'm going to the Hill this week, and what I'm going to recommend basically is now I'm in touch with the people who operate the Navy's undersea surveillance system of sonars, and I had a phone call with a guy who works there, and basically, so now I have a point of contact that Congress can go to and look at the dates of every one of these things like this and find the acoustic data and see if there's a corollary there. And so those are the recommendations I'm going to make to the House Oversight Committee, is to go look at that acoustic data and get some verification. For that, also for this was off Puerto Rico, Aguadilla, the location, and the Customs and Border Patrol found they have data of a rapidly moving UAP going 90 miles per hour, going in and out of the water. Raise your hands if you've ever seen the video. Yep. You guys are pros, I can tell. So, yeah. And so there's that example. I want to get the acoustic data around the Caribbean on that too, so I'm going to recommend that. And then there was this off SoCal in 2019, this object that no flight control surfaces or exhaust went into the water, and it was observed by the Omaha, and then its sister ship went and observed similar objects recently reported later in I think 2022. So, and I know the petty officer on the bridge of that ship who saw it. He came out to me. But this area is heavily instrumented with acoustic sensors. So again, I'm going to try to see if we can get some acoustic correlation here with this. I'm going to get Congress to go do that. A couple other things. So one of the books I showed you, Preston Dennett wrote a book about SoCal USOs and UAPs, and he speculated about this undersea base. And that's all out there. Hal Puthoff has talked about that possibility. He's a well-regarded physicist and engineer. And this particular area off Southern California, in Google Earth, it's rendered like this. So it's important to be objective. I'm an oceanographer. So I did. I went and looked at the data, and I'll get to that. But weirdly, again, going back to disinformation, as this whole thread of undersea alien base was going around last year in UFO Twitter or whatever it's called, this happened. Google removed it. They decimated it, meaning they kind of undersampled the data. They provided undersampled data so the feature wouldn't appear. Why did they do that? Just like Sean Kirkpatrick. Why would Sean Kirkpatrick say those things about me that were false? Who influenced Google to do this? Sadly, though, they did it, and they shouldn't have, because to me, there's no data that confirms it's a base. It's actually a real geological feature. Here's the real geology, and you can see it looks fairly natural. I mean, it's anomalous in terms of weird-looking thing, but it looks like a geological feature. There's been a paper on it. They've done seismic surveys of it, so meaning low-frequency sound that penetrates the seabed. That you can, if there was a base under there, they know it. They have the data. And it wasn't there. So it's important to look up and not speculate, but to look at the data. And for this thing, I think we can discredit that. But I'm not going to say, as Hal, there's a possibility. They come from somewhere. They go somewhere. I don't know where. But so there could be something undersea, and I think that's certainly worth considering. But in this case, I don't think it is. Now, I'm just going to wrap up here. And it's an interesting thing about it. This is a kind of a new topic in the UAP arena, UAP in the ocean. Again, I follow it because that's what I do and know. I'm an ocean person. But it's not that new. When I graduated from the academy in 1989, this movie came out. Raise your hand if you've seen the movie. It's a good movie. But interestingly, in the plot, they encounter what they called NTI, non-terrestrial intelligence. Not far off from NHI, right? So wow, how about that? They were already thinking about it back then. And this is even before Close Encounters. So I thought that was really interesting. And if you even go back farther, H.G. Wells wrote a short story called In the Abyss. And here's a little picture from the book. And you can see this researcher in a bathyscape encounters an NHI. And that's the story. So he even came up with this idea. Not sure where he got it from, but that's fascinating. And of course, everybody knows Jules Verne from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I hope, at least, I do. And here's his quote on this topic about the potential for intelligent life under the sea. Again, we have not explored even 90% of the ocean. When I was at NOAA, we were discovering new species every year. And in fact, the Schmidt Ocean Institute, a key NOAA partner, just this year, went and surveyed an area off of Antarctica that had previously been covered by a big ice cap, and it broke free, became an iceberg, if you will, and it was new ocean to go look at. So they surged the ship in, put down a remotely operated vehicle, and found all these new species that had never been discovered. That's the nature of our unknown ocean, and maybe it's just not new species. Well, maybe it is new species, and maybe they're something that we've never even thought about that are truly out of this world. So I want to thank you all for your time. It's great to be here. Appreciate you supporting the topic. And I'm happy to take questions. Shree's got the mic.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Tim. So Tim's, as he mentioned a few times, he's going straight to the Hill after this. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions about anything you talked about or anything in the future. Start with you.
Hi, hello. Thank you for the presentation. So I have a question that's similar to what Bobby was asking, but maybe from another perspective. So my first question is who, right? Because we're talking about this information is being concealed. It's clearly being researched, but you talk about government doing the cover-up. These are abstract institutions, right? So I'm curious, who is it? If you could pinpoint or be more, in your opinion, more specificity, we're talking about Google now putting that away. So I'm just curious about the who instead of just these institutions. And the other thing I was going to ask is why, right? Sure, of course, it would be existentially difficult to grasp as a society, but why do you think they are concealing it? If you had to guess, maybe even speculate, why would they want to keep this incredible information concealed?
What's your name? Good question. First off, I'm pretty sure I know who it is. It's ultimately there's top-level policy direction. And it comes from the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, as well as the Director of National Intelligence. And to the extent that the president is involved, I don't think Biden was involved. I think Trump might be, but they're gonna, the White House, and so the National Security Council as well. Those are the three big offices that everything flows down from. And then of course, the people who are owning it, there's contractors who have the material, there's CIA, DIA, and some military institutions possibly like NASIC and NRO. But ultimately, the policy of whether to disclose and whether to classify it comes up from those three top agencies. Then, in fact, USDI had some job offerings that was going to support Aero, and they'd gotten filled. And the job description involved things like perception management. Yeah, exactly right. I know what that is. So that's that. Why? I understand why. First off, it's a big thing. These things are operating with impunity in our airspace and water space. No government wants to admit that. It's just not good policy to say we can't protect our airspace and water space. So that's why we've advocated for controlled disclosure, to say, first, let's just acknowledge we're not alone, and maybe not necessarily reveal the extent that we're compromised. And then, because the extreme of it is this, and I've arrived at a really amazing place right now where I'm sure that not only are they operating with impunity, in some cases they're harming people, in some people they're abducting people. And I know that sounds wacko to a lot of you, but I've done the research, I've met the people, and this is happening. I'm convinced, and it's crazy. But like a year ago, I thought that's just whack. I would never believe that. But I've met the people. An abductee I know was the director of CIA's domestic operations. Very credible guy named Jim Semivan. You can look him up, and he's got an experience. So this is real, and no government wants to admit this. And I got that. That's why we're not. I don't think the public's ready for that either. So I don't talk about that often because that's scary. But I think research though. We got to start doing research. We have to learn. We have to gradually accept the new reality, and this has to happen in a very phased, deliberate way. And that's why it hasn't come out. And that's why we are saying, okay, let's just reveal a little, so we can start doing open research on it. And that should be. That should absolutely be. And as the way my friend Carl Nell has said, the government doesn't have an exclusive right to the nature of reality. We're a government by the people, for the people. The people deserve to know that. And granted, the government's got to be careful about what it shares for public safety and preventing a panic like War of the Worlds. But we're ready to know at least the nature of that.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Isaac.
you.
Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. Speaking about research, I know that you got a PhD in underwater acoustics.
You have a PhD?
No. I said you do.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Can you speak about what potentially the properties of those materials are that would lead to there not being that ping back? Do you have any idea about what the materials could be made of?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know, but I have a lot of books to recommend to you. And one of them is by a person in the Army who dealt with the Roswell UFO crash retrieval. And his name is Phil Corso, and the book is called The Day After Roswell. Some of it is, he has a co-author that embellished a little bit, but generally the story is true. And they went and looked at the properties of the craft, the surface of it, elements of it that resulted in reverse engineering advances that led to things like fiber optics and lasers. Again, I know that some of the book is a little bit over. Some writers, a co-author took some liberties. So I don't know which parts, but generally I know for a fact it's true. We recovered it. We reverse engineered parts of it, not all of it. So the materials, I don't know, but they have properties we're still trying to figure out. We've not been able to reproduce.
Thank you.
But material science is a fascinating topic, and we have a lot to learn about that. Yes, sir. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Admiral. Appreciate you coming here. So there's, in my estimation or perception, there seems to be some sort of policy change within the programs, if you will. And I just assume that if there wasn't, then people like Lou Elizondo, Mr. Graves, Mr. Fravor, Mr. Grush, they'd probably be in a lot of trouble for what they're saying. And so my wonder is the movement of controlled disclosure leading to what, say Stephen Greer would describe as a new golden age, where we get the proliferation of technology that can really increase the quality of life for the public and solve some systemic issues? Or do you see this going towards a narrative that UAPs are the threat, there's a new threat, it's going to require more military spending and more weapons and more fear?
Yeah, that's a good one. First off, I think we've crossed the Rubicon. So Congress, not policy, Congress has said they've given a reprieve to whistleblowers, and that's really changed everything. It started with the New York Times article, Leslie Kane, and who's a friend of mine also. So then Congress got involved, and now they're continuing to act. And it's really a matter of time, because the UAP Disclosure Act was absolutely historic, even though it wasn't passed in its entirety. The things it put down there, the sources that came to inform it, the genie is out of the bottle, and so that's going to happen. We're going to have controlled disclosure in some way. It's gradually happening. Like with my attending this Hill meeting with Lou and Chris Mellon this week, and so. But in terms of that future, it's really unknown about the policy, and we want for there to be open research. I want for people like Avi and others to get their hands on some of the material and start researching it. That should be. But the nature of their intent and what that all causes for public policy is a real wild card. That's going to be a tough thing to balance. And that's why the controlled disclosure, if anybody, I highly encourage you to look online. The Soul Foundation publishes their every symposium they had one this year, the videos from the speakers. I'm on one. But there's a gentleman in this area who was on the UAP task force named Carl Nell, the Army rep, and his presentation is really superb and about the controlled disclosure plan, lines of effort, the stages. He has a whole graph. He did it in a very super military way, and which I know very well from being in the Pentagon. And that his whole plan is, to me, the way ahead if we get it right. And there are a lot of congressmen who like it. They want to get that done. We'll see about the government, the executive branch. Yes, sir.
I wonder what other countries. I did my master's here in the School of the Environment. I wonder what other countries are doing, or what are their experiences.
They're vast, actually. I just spoke to the Japanese Parliament, the National Diet. They have a giant caucus that includes former ministers of defense, foreign ministers, and they're very interested in that. Italy, I don't know about the government, but I have met so many UAP researchers from Italy. France has a national effort as well. Canada's leadership and Israel's past leadership have all spoken about it. It's and that's why we have in the Soul Foundation Jonathan Berta. He's from Belgium, and he's helping us lead our international collaboration. So these things don't know national boundaries. They're obviously and if anything can drive us together, it really should be this. Right now, I think it's going to take a while. We're not ready yet as a nation, but it is something that we can hopefully use to work together more. Yeah. Thanks, Sergio. You had a question?
Hi, that was a really good talk. I was wondering if you have any evidence if the UAPs are communicating with one another, and any theories on how you envision that the UAPs might communicate with us, or might be trying to communicating with us at the moment. Like what that communication looks like.
What's your major again? Immunology? Good question. So how they communicate with us?
Mm-hmm. Or
so,
how do you think they are?
No, I'm sure I know how it is. And this is also a stretch for people, but not for me. And there's a reason for this. I have personal experience. But it seems to be, who here was studying consciousness? Were you?
I say neurology consciousness.
Oh, okay. Wasn't there somebody else? You were? Yeah. There's a lot of reporting about them speaking to us telepathically. And for those who just think that's, again, whack like everything else, I don't think so. There is so much research into this. If you look at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, Bigelow has done studies. He had a whole institute. I think it's NIDS is what the institute was called, and he sponsored papers on consciousness. And so when you really go down to it, there is a science about it. So actually, consciousness and UAP are in the same boat that mainstream media and science don't want to touch it, even though there's a ton of validity. There's solid research. And actually, I'll go this far. I group it in the same area as climate science. In School of Environment, who else is School of Environment here? So the media, the mainstream media and mainstream science have gotten climate all wrong. I won't go too far on this, but I've published a lot on this. Everyone's gone, they're either, the current administration is just saying it's not a thing, which is totally wrong. And then, because I was up in the Arctic on that submarine, because the Arctic is changing, it's melting, the ice, it's harder to navigate on a submarine, it's a big deal. But at the same time, the alarmism and the extreme emission scenarios are just not scientifically right. When people sit there and start talking about, warming planet, more storms, more bad storms, that's not true either. If you look at Atlantic hurricanes, if you look at typhoons, none of those have shown a change over the last century. So it's just an example of people not being disciplined and being open-minded about what's really going on. There's a lot of people that stay in the game from climate alarmism, and rather than just being more objective. And the same goes for avoiding the topic of UAP and consciousness. And so I just think we have to be really smart about the science and accept what's real and not. And no one wants to touch UAP and consciousness, but it's absolutely real. And I'm 100% convinced, and I'll say I know from my experience that human consciousness survives physical death. That's not really a belief. I almost have physical evidence, but I have data. I'll just say that. And so that they have evolved they're obviously evolved in a way that their consciousness is much more advanced than ours, I think. And so that seems to be the preponderance of the reporting. Anyways, that's kind of a big deal. I just went off on that. But thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
When you say human consciousness survives physical death, would you be able to elaborate on what you mean and what that might look like? And if it survives, how long it survives for?
Well, I don't know. Those are things, I don't know how long it is, but I think there are so many examples of people being able to communicate to those who passed. I know several. I mean, mediumship, it's a thing. I think it defies probabilistic explanation in terms of the things that the mediums I've met. Who here has seen Long Island Medium? I mean, I went to her show, and it was in Baltimore, and it was crazy because she was pulling people out of the audience that had these experiences on the Chesapeake Bay, and just totally local experiences that she was able to pick out. And I mean, yeah, she's a celebrity, but then I also know two people who are mediums that have told me things they could never have known. They could never have known about me personally and my relationships that happened that she was able to tap into. And then there's interesting, the UAP, I guess, pros, advocates like me, there's an intersection here that I don't understand. We don't really all understand. But we know it to be real. And I think just what I want to call for is openness and research. Because I mean, there's been a lot of research on this topic. Again, NIDS, if you look that up, Bigelow's NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science, and it's actually top quality research. I would highly recommend people look into that if they want. What's your name? You have a question?
I had a question about sort of the cuts that we're seeing across the government and how that might impact some of this work. So NOAA, for example, is obviously taking a lot of the cuts, and I personally feel sad about like the OAR cuts, but there's also cuts coming to things like the radar offices and leases to many observatories. How do changes in monitoring and observation stations impact sort of the world's future outlook on something like this? And do you think there's some other agency that's going to step in and take on that role of monitoring better?
So can you say that again? The cuts to NOAA and how that's affects
So sort of the leases that NOAA is cutting now are on things like radar offices and observatories.
Yeah, what about them?
Once those go away, we sort of lose a little bit of observation power. And I'm curious if that impacts UAP sighting at all, or observation and detection of UAPs.
Well, that's a good question. Well, first off, the cuts to NOAA, I definitely don't support. I've written an op-ed on this in the Hill. The title of the op-ed is "Firings Are Not the Way to Make NOAA Great Again." And so, and ultimately I explain what I think to find government efficiency, just cut redundant programs. NASA has a giant Earth observation mission. That's great, but NOAA operates environmental satellites too. Why do you have both? Yeah, funds a lot of scientists. The scientists who get funded by that don't want that to go, but seriously, NOAA have that capability. It's all there. The other thing is everything that they're cutting right now is supporting an important priority for this administration: public safety, national security, the economy. So they're really senseless and self-defeating, in my opinion. Will they affect UAP? Not yet. I have advocated, so the whole government approach that I've advocated for involves, NOAA's got just an array of observing capabilities. And in fact, a NOAA scientist came to me with a very interesting UAP observation from a mission that he did with NASA. NASA aircraft that was collecting atmospheric chemistry observations over the North Pole, and they saw an object that shouldn't have been over the North Pole, illuminated cigar-shaped craft there for a long time. There's not an aircraft route there, and he had video of it. In fact, sadly, his house was lost in a fire in Colorado, and he lost the video. But he came out to tell me. I remember he wrote me an article about open science or open-minded science. And I thought, you want to be really open-minded? Well, check out what I'm doing here. And I said, you might think I'm off my rocker, but here you go. And he said, I don't think you're off your rocker, and here's my story. So I think it could be used. The data, they're just not doing it right now. And it's like the acoustics for this Navy. Their filters are set to look at things that the Navy cares about, not everything. And I've advocated to start looking at all the data sets and open up the aperture to look for anomalies. So there you go. Thanks. Any others? Yes, sir. Bobby. Your question. Is that Bobby?
Yes. No, but I'm
You're not Bobby?
I'm not Bobby.
You look like him. Sorry. Where'd he go?
Bobby had to leave.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about it. What's your name?
Bobby. Yeah.
Okay.
So, how has it not been revealed yet? Because, you're saying it's been going on for a century. America is not the epicenter. Doesn't happen everything in America. Thousands of governments, tens of thousands of government employees. You would think at least one government throughout, the last century would be self-obsessed enough to be like, oh yes, there are aliens, and reveal it. Classified information does leak. We still don't have any real proof. I look at it and I still have doubts. I have not seen any proofs that would be yes, this is an alien body. I'm convinced. There are self-righteous. There are self-righteous people like Snowden, right? Who, with the access to information, have leaked it because they were humanity must know. Somebody, at some point they look at this, they must reveal it. They must feel an urge to reveal it. So how has it happened yet? And then from a biological perspective, do you think they're carbon-based or not?
Do what?
Do you think aliens or unidentified things are carbon-based?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. But they've been, I believe they've been analyzed in labs, but I don't know the details of that. But ultimately, how do we not know, or how? So first off, again, the materials have been very strictly controlled, and so you're just. But by the way, I'll hear Gary Nolan, Stanford. He's gotten some materials. He's done chemical analysis of them. I mean, they're just fragments. They're metallic fragments. But he did the analysis, and he said, well, these are industrial engineered. They're not naturally occurring. And there are ways that the isotope ratios are ways that we've never been able to create. So that's pretty interesting. But in general, the attack craft and bodies and all these things, I mean, see, people think, oh, God, first off, like, the government is pretty good at controlling and classifying things. I was read into a number of programs that are just have never seen the light of day and probably never will, which I'm glad for, actually. I don't want our adversaries knowing these things. So that's one. But also, too, a lot has come out. Lou's book, Phil Corso's book. There's others. There's a really great book out there I highly recommend you read called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which goes into the government program. So people are coming out, and more so than ever before. Yeah, I want to see stuff too, but that's going to be that's going to be a ways off. Again, that's going to take the president to say, and that's going to be a while. It's not going to be soon. I'm gonna kind of keep it tight here, but ultimately you can look me up online, and if you want to write me a note, I'd be happy to have an exchange with you guys, gals. I appreciate you coming. One more question? No, these guys have been patriots. I want to hear your question. What's your name?
So I want to talk a little bit about crash retrievals, and specifically if the Navy has had its own parallel crash retrieval program with Neuro, possibly Bobby Ray Inman and whatnot, and recovering with the, I think it's like the DSRVs that kind of submerge.
Oh, so you see UAP Gerb's show?
Oh, I know. I know that, yeah.
He's a good guy.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, so this is interesting about him and me. Oceanographer for the Navy, read into a lot of things. I was not read into that program. Actually, I knew it by another name, Neuro. I knew it by another name, Navy Special Activities. So, I was very tangentially, I knew the leaders of that office, but this was strictly foreign adversary tech, and that's some of the most classified things there are: foreign submarines, undersea surveillance capabilities, etc. So that stuff submarine force is really good about keeping that under wraps. However, I don't know that they've recovered USOs, materials, etc. I don't know. I never saw it. But when I put two and two together, and I worked in the Pentagon, and I knew the guys and gals in charge of that, and they were submarine officers and Navy SEALs. And I've never asked them, but if anything was found underwater, and I showed you one that it was a crashed one that the Safeguard got, that's the office that would get it. So you put two and two together, my knowledge of the government, he is spot on. The guy's an amazing researcher. I mean, God. Yeah, this guy, if you look him up on Twitter, his handle is UAP Gerb, and his name is Samuel Gerbis, and he is a first-rate UAP researcher. I highly recommend you go on his site and check out some of what he's produced. He's really good at that. I'm going to call tonight, but I want to thank you all for your attention. And again, you can contact me directly. I'm on the web. I'm on LinkedIn. It's a great way to do it. And I'd be happy to answer questions, help you out however, and move this forward together. Thank you. Ready to roll? All right.